Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through different sources to pull out the most interesting, the most important stuff, basically giving you a shortcut to being well-informed.
That's the goal. Quick insights, deep understanding.
And today, wow, we are diving into Andrew Jackson, specifically some of the most extraordinary and, frankly, kind of unbelievable things from his life. We've been looking at historical texts.
Right, trying to pull out those moments that make you go, did that really happen?
Exactly. The crazy things, let's call them. Now, Jackson's obviously controversial, we know that. And exploring these extreme events, these unusual moments, really sheds light on why. I'm actually really curious to unpack this.
Oh, me too. His story is just packed with these almost legendary incidents, and looking at these specific crazy moments helps us see the intense contradictions of the man in his time.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Andrew Jackson, the duelist. This wasn't just a one-off thing for him. He was a frontier lawyer. And the stories say, what, over 100 duels?
Yeah, the number itself is staggering. It points to a certain kind of frontier culture, doesn't it?
But that 1806 duel with Charles Dickinson, that one stands out. Dickinson insulted Jackson's wife, Rachel.
A huge deal back then. An attack on honor, especially family honor.
So Dickinson fires first, hits Jackson square in the chest. Now get this. Jackson already had a bullet in his chest from a previous fight.
Which is just incredible resilience, or maybe stubbornness.
Right. But he doesn't flinch. Stands there bleeding, takes careful aim, and shoots Dickinson dead. One shot. I mean, what does that tell you about him and the times?
Well, it screams volumes about that code of honor, especially in the South and on the frontier. Reputation was everything. You didn't let insults slide, particularly about your wife. Jackson's reaction, wounded but resolute, that's his fierce pride, his protectiveness of Rachel right there.
And the fact he was already carrying leads, it's just a level of toughness that's hard for us to even grasp today, you know?
Definitely shaped by a different world, a much harsher one.
Speaking of harsh, his early life set the stage, didn't it? Orphan young, father died before he was born, lost his mother, his brothers.
A brutal start, really brutal.
Then, he's just 13 years old, serving as a courier in the Revolutionary War. He gets captured by the British, refuses to clean an officer's boots.
And gets slashed with a saber for it. Left him with scars, physically and probably mentally.
Yeah. It's hard not to see how that kind of childhood, that kind of intense early experience wouldn't forge someone incredibly tough, resilient, maybe even angry.
Absolutely. You see those threads later on, that toughness, maybe a certain distrust of authority figures, a tendency towards decisive, from its pretty extreme action. He was definitely a product of a very tough, unforgiving early America.
And that toughness was key in his military career. Let's talk New Orleans, 1815, leading this ragtag army, as it's often called.
Yeah, a real mix of people. Regulars, militia, pirates, free black soldiers.
Against the British veterans. Yeah. And they pull off this stunning victory. It cemented him as a national hero.
Instantly iconic. Old Hickory.
But here's the truly wild part. The timing. The War of 1812. It was already over.
Right. The Treaty of Ghent had been signed weeks before in Europe.
News just traveled so incredibly slowly back then. So this massive defining battle technically happened after peace was declared. Isn't that nuts?
It's one of history's great ironies. But, you know, it didn't matter in terms of his reputation. The victory itself was what counted. It was seen as this great American triumph against the odds.
And it's a global superpower, yeah.
And Jackson was the man who delivered it. It completely shaped his public image, the gritty, determined leader. The timing quirk just adds another layer of, well, strangeness to it all.
That grit image definitely carried over to his presidency. The inauguration in 1829, the stories are just legendary.
Oh, yeah. Pandemonium's probably the right word.
He invited the public, his common man supporters, right? Farmers, laborers.
And they came in droves. They flooded the White House.
Reports of people climbing in windows, muddy boots on furniture, tubs of whiskey punch. Just chaos. Furniture getting smashed.
Total mayhem. Apparently, the staff had to lure the crowds back outside by putting the punch bowls on the lawn. And Jackson himself supposedly had to escape through a window or a side door.
It's hard to even picture that scene at a presidential inauguration today.
Well, it absolutely terrified the establishment, his opponents. They saw it as, like, the mob taking over. King mob, they called it.
But for his supporters.
It was symbolic, wasn't it? It was their guy taking power. It was the people storming the elite's stronghold. It perfectly captured that populist energy and the deep divisions of the Jacksonian era.
And that energy, that sort of anti-elite feeling, really fueled his big fight, didn't it? The war against the national bank.
Oh, absolutely. He hated the Bank of the United States, saw it as this corrupt, elitist institution that benefited the rich and had too much power over the economy.
So he just decided to kill it.
Yeah.
Vetoed the recharter bill in 32, then started pulling federal funds out in 33.
Right.
These were huge controversial moves.
Massive. It caused a big financial panic, actually. But Jackson was convinced he was right. He famously preferred hard money, gold and silver coin, over paper currency.
And wasn't there a personal story behind that? Like he'd been swindled with paper money earlier in his life.
That's the story, yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it was the sole reason or just reinforced his view, it shows how personal conviction could drive major national policy for him. He believed the bank was wrong, bad for the common man, and he acted decisively. Very Jackson.
Okay, speaking of decisive action, the assassination attempt. 1835, this is maybe the wildest story of all.
It's truly incredible. Richard Lawrence, this house painter, steps out from behind a pillar as Jackson leaves the Capitol.
Pulls out a pistol, points it right at Jackson, point-blank range, click, misfire.
Just amazing luck. But then Lawrence pulls out a second pistol.
A point at one, fires, click, another misfire. The odds of two separate pistols misfiring like that,
Yeah.
astronomical.
Statistically almost impossible, yeah. People at the time thought it was divine intervention protecting Jackson.
But Jackson's reaction, he's 67 years old, kind of frail by this point.
Right. Not exactly in peak physical condition.
Does he run? No. He lunges at Lawrence and starts beating him with his cane.
Starts wailing on him until the crowd jumps in and restrains Lawrence. It's just a pure Jackson again. That instinct to attack, even when facing death.
The sheer audacity, it just adds to that larger-than-life, almost mythical image he had. Untouchable.
Absolutely. It cemented that image of him as this figure protected by fate. Incredibly tough. Someone you just didn't mess with.
Okay, but we have to pivot here because alongside these almost heroic tough guy stories, there's a profoundly dark side, a really dark side.
Essential to confront, yeah. We can't talk about Jackson without talking about slavery.
He was a major slave owner, hundreds of people enslaved at the Hermitage, his plantation. And he wasn't just passively participating, he actively defended the institution.
Openly and proudly. Over his lifetime, estimates suggest he owned up to 300 enslaved individuals.
The hypocrisy is just staggering, isn't it? Championing liberty for, well, white men while profiting from the forced labor and bondage of hundreds of black men, women, and children.
It's the central contradiction, not just of Jackson, but of the early American Republic itself. This idea of freedom coexisting with brutal chattel slavery. It's something we absolutely have to grapple with.
And then directly related in many ways is the Indian Removal Act of 1830, his policy.
Yes. A policy he pursued relentlessly.
Forcing tens of thousands of Native Americans, the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, off their ancestral lands in the Southeast.
Lands they had lived on for generations, lands guaranteed to them by treaties.
All to open it up for white settlement and cotton cultivation, largely. The result was the Trail of Tears.
A horrific forced march westward. Thousands died. Estimates often cite over 4,000 deaths, maybe more from starvation, disease, exposure during that removal.
It's just a devastating chapter. And Jackson was the driving force behind it.
He was. It was fueled by racism, by greed for land, and justified by legal arguments that essentially stripped Native nations of their sovereignty. The consequences were catastrophic and are still felt today. It's a brutal part of his legacy, no question.
And within that context, there's another one of those strange, almost unbelievable Jackson stories. Lincoya.
Ah, yes, the adopted Native American boy.
After the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814, a battle where Jackson's forces, massacred hundreds of Creek warriors and civilians, he finds this orphan Creek infant on the battlefield.
Found him with his dead mother.
And instead of leaving him, Jackson adopts him, sends him back to the Hermitage to be raised alongside his own adopted son.
Right. Lincoya was raised in the Jackson household. Jackson even wrote about wanting to educate him at West Point, though that never happened. He died young, around 16, probably from tuberculosis.
It's such a jarring story, given the context of the Indian Removal Act and the violence. What do you make of that? Was it a trophy? An act of bizarre compassion?
It's incredibly complex and, frankly, unsettling. Interpretations vary wildly. Some see it as a fleeting moment of humanity, others as a deeply problematic, almost tokenistic gesture within a genocidal campaign. It really highlights the difficulty in understanding the motivations of historical figures, especially one as contradictory as Jackson. The irony is just thick.
Yeah, unsettling feels like the right word. His personal life was just as dramatic too, wasn't it? The whole scandal around his marriage to Rachel.
Oh, definitely. That plagued him for years. Rachel had been previously married, and the circumstances of her divorce and remarriage to Jackson were murky, legally speaking, at first.
His political enemies seized on it, didn't they? Called her an adulteress, called him a seducer. Vicious stuff.
Absolutely vicious. It caused them both immense pain. And when Rachel died suddenly, just weeks after he won the presidency in 1828, but before he took office,
He blamed his opponents. He believed their attacks had literally broken her heart and killed her.
he never forgave them. It fueled this deep, burning rage in him throughout his presidency, added another layer to his already confrontational style. And remember, he was still carrying that bullet from the Dickinson duel, fought partly over insults to Rachel. It's like this constant undercurrent of violence and grievance.
Always simmering. And speaking of confrontational, his presidency itself, King Andrew. Where did that come from?
His use of the veto power, presidents before him had used the veto very sparingly, mostly on constitutional grounds.
But Jackson.
Jackson used it more than all previous presidents combined, often simply because he disagreed with the law politically. He saw the presidency as the direct representative of the people's will, more so than Congress.
So he wasn't afraid to block legislation he didn't like.
Not at all. His opponents saw it as tyrannical, an overreach of executive power, hence the nickname King Andrew I. They literally drew cartoons of him dressed as a king trampling on the Constitution.
But he saw himself as a warrior for democracy, right? Against the elites in the Congress or the bank.
Exactly. It perfectly encapsulates the debate around him. Was he expanding democracy for the common white man, or was he becoming an autocrat?
Even his final years seem to fit the pattern. Retires to the hermitage.
Surrounded by the enslaved people who ran his plantation, living out his days as a planter.
His last words were apparently about hoping to meet Rachel in heaven. And his tombstone. It doesn't even mention his presidency, does it?
No, it focuses on his military career. General Andrew Jackson, that's how he primarily saw himself, or wanted to be remembered, perhaps.
And then the final unbelievable detail. His pet parrot, Pole.
Ah, Pole the parrot. Yes.
Apparently the parrot had learned to swear so proficiently, likely mimicking Jackson himself.
That it had to be removed from Jackson's own funeral because it wouldn't stop cursing.
You can't make this stuff up. It's almost darkly comedic, but it feels weirdly appropriate for him somehow. This larger-than-life, often crude, always intense figure.
It's a bizarre final footnote to an absolutely extraordinary life, isn't it? Adds one last touch of the wild and unexpected.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's just undeniable. Jackson's life was filled with these truly crazy, almost unbelievable moments. Duels, battles against the odds, surviving assassination, the inauguration chaos.
And alongside that, the deeply troubling actions upholding slavery, the brutal Indian removal policies, he's just a figure of staggering contradictions.
He really embodied that common man spirit for many, yet wielded immense power, sometimes ruthlessly.
His life forces you to confront those uncomfortable truths about American history, the triumphs and the tragedies, often embodied in the very same person.
Which brings us to the big takeaway, I guess. How do you reconcile it all? The heroic image versus the deeply problematic reality. What does his story, packed with these wild events, tell us about America then and maybe even now?
Those are the crucial questions, aren't they? His life isn't simple, and maybe the lesson is that history rarely is. We have to look at all of it, the unbelievable and the uncomfortable.
So think about it. Given everything we've touched on, the duels, New Orleans, the cane-wielding, the bank war, the Trail of Tears, King Andrew, even the swearing parrot, what single image or event truly captures the unbelievable wild nature of Andrew Jackson's life for you? Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.